Welcome to the revolution.
Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in prison in the Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking case. 20 years. Who would have thought? Now, I'm surprised because this article was written on June 26th or June 28th. June 28th, that she has not somehow managed to kill herself already magically in a prison with, padded walls. But I'm also surprised that you can get a sex trafficking case when you've never actually trafficked it to any individuals who are being charged with the crime in the first place. Who did she traffic these people to? Because we know there was a big, long black book, Epstein's black book of every individual, videotapes, VHSs, in boxes of VHS tapes that were taken from Epstein Island, literal names of all the flight logs. Not a single individual at all that we've been told of has been prosecuted for having children trafficked to them by Ghislaine Maxwell. So here it goes. It says, British socialite turned convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell finally got her due Tuesday when she was sentenced to 20 years in prison for her role in helping rich and powerful pedophile Jeffrey Epstein abuse young girls. Now, what this doesn't mention too is that she was also accused of raping young girls with him. As if you followed the trial, you would have saw, because there was actually testimony by I think it was Giraffe, Giraffe, who testified that she was inappropriately touched, and Ghislaine Maxwell was actually a part of these actions that happened on the island and was a part of grooming them and actually exploiting them sexually. Goes on to say that U.S. District Judge Allison Nathan said the sentence of 240 months was sufficient and not greater than necessary for Maxwell, who earlier addressed the court and told victims in a half-hearted apology, "I am sorry for the pain that you experienced." Yeah, okay. As she finally learned her fate, the 60-year-old predator's face remained inscrutable, and she briefly hugged her attorneys before leaving the courtroom, wearing blue jail scrubs, her dark brown locks cut in a bob, and her ankles in shackles. She did not speak to her siblings, who were seated in the row behind her. The number of people harmed is impossible to measure, said victim Annie Farmer, who testified at trial, told the court during Tuesday's hearing as Maxwell's shoulders tensed. The Epstein madam tried to avoid looking at her victims as they spoke, but she did lock eyes with Sarah Ransom when her victim told her, "You broke me in unfathomable ways. But you didn't break my spirit, nor did you dampen my internal flame that now burns brighter than ever before." And it's amazing how we got so much coverage of how many trials over the last year and a half between Kyle Rittenhouse and we've literally never had more celebrity trials than we've had in the last, 7 months. All these huge, inside the courtroom, Hollywood-esque type events. And then speaking of that, Nancy Pelosi hiring a literal, director of movies to try and put a celebrity-esque spin on the January 6th trials, which I think are still going on today. I don't know. Nobody's watching them and nobody really cares because everybody knows that it was potentially set up by the FBI, as pointed to by Ted Cruz, who interviewed the CIA Director Assistant of National Security, some long name, where she's, if you recall, I put out a video on it where she goes, I can't answer that. Did you guys incite violence on January 6th? I can't answer that. Did you guys have agents present who were provocateurs to attempt to get into the Capitol building? I can't answer that. Well, why can't you answer that? Well, you can't answer that because the answer is yes. And then we saw, Ray Epps, right? Ray Epps, you go back and look at Ray Epps, and Ray Epps was the individual who I put in my video, who was going into the Capitol, we got to go in there. And then out of everybody who's literally still sitting in a white jail cell right now in the bottom of Joe Biden's White House, being held by the CIA secretly, allegedly, Ray Epps is still sitting on his, 100-acre farm with a golf cart, not facing any charges, when there's actually footage of him telling people the day before that they have to go into the Capitol. I don't know. I digress. But it's all a conspiracy theory. I don't actually believe any of that. It says Maxwell's defense attorneys, meanwhile, I don't know how we got into that. Maxwell's defense attorney, meanwhile, had begged for leniency, saying she should get no more than 4 to 5 years. Wow. For raping and sex trafficking dozens, if not hundreds, of young women in a literal Ponzi scheme of pedophilia. If you look back, if you go watch the documentary, which I started and didn't finish because it made me sick to my stomach, having to watch this and all the horrific things that they did to these kids. But if you go back, the way that they did it is they literally recruited it like it was a multi-level market. They would get one girl in a school to go back and recruit other girls from the school, to go back and recruit other girls from the school, and they would pay them money for every girl that they brought in to give massages to these old men, and eventually they would be sex trafficked to an island of celebrities, and their parents were like, it was just so gross. But it was like a multi-level, literally like a multi-level market, like the advocare of pedophilia. And Ghislaine Maxwell ran it all. Literally ran it all. Was the one who convinced the girls, would go into the, go by the schools and pick these girls up, would have them in the room with her, and then actually sexually assault them the way that they were outlined within that as well. So it goes on to say that her sentence marked the end of a lengthy criminal proceedings that started after Maxwell's arrest at a sprawling New Hampshire estate in July of 2020. Prosecutors brought the charges against Maxwell months after Epstein, her former partner in crime, killed himself in Manhattan jail cell while awaiting trial on sex trafficking raps. Today's sentence holds Ghislaine Maxwell accountable for perpetrating heinous crimes against children, U.S. Attorney of the Southern District of New York, Navian Williams, said in a statement. This sentence sends a strong message that no one is above the law and is never too late for justice. Maxwell's attorney, Bobby Sternheim, and if you watched any of the trials, or if you listened to the actual outlines of the trials or what was actually said, it was this woman was disgusting. She literally related Jeffrey Epstein to James Bond in her opening statement. Literally called him a modern day James Bond in her opening statement about sex trafficking children for pedophilia. It goes on to say, in addition to the prison term, she also imposed a $750,000 fine on Maxwell, who could potentially get credit for the 2 years she's already spent behind bars or have some of her time shaved off for good behavior. That's terrible. I don't think there's any amount of good behavior that overcomes you literally sex trafficking children for profit and then also sexually assaulting them. It also says that her attorneys requested that she serve out her time at a federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut, the low-security women's lockup that served as the inspiration for Netflix Orange is the New Black. The Oxford-educated heiress and daughter of late publishing tycoon Robert Maxwell, who spent much of her life hobnobbing with the rich and famous. Hobnobbing, that's an interesting term, was convicted of sex trafficking. If you don't know anything about Ghislaine Maxwell's dad, that's another interesting conversation. Ghislaine Maxwell's dad was allegedly an agent for the Mossad, which is like a secret intelligence agency for, I think it's like Saudi Arabia or something like that, or the Saudi princes, I don't know. But he also purchased the books, what is it? It's McGraw-Hill. Ghislaine Maxwell's dad bought McGraw-Hill. Every single textbook ever that you ever got ever in high school that had McGraw-Hill on it was owned by Ghislaine Maxwell's dad, who at one point considered changing the name to Maxwell, but then didn't do so in fear that it would come back on him and who his actual, his background was, but owned McGraw-Hill. And I believe still does today. Like that family still owns McGraw-Hill, which is literally every textbook ever in both high school, middle school, elementary school, and college. Every person out there right now can identify with that book company. McGraw-Hill is owned by Ghislaine Maxwell's dad. The Ghislaine Maxwell who, and it's like, I think her dad actually died, got pushed off, didn't get pushed off, fell off of a boat, his yacht in like the middle of the ocean, mysteriously. That family's nuts. And you look back at their background, the sister of Ghislaine Maxwell, like, was one of the very first internet technology tycoons who came out with a search engine or some shit back in the early 90s and became a billionaire off of it. It's crazy when you look into the history of Ghislaine Maxwell and her family. Goes on to say that 4 women testified at her highly publicized trial, and not enough highly publicized as, Pirates of the Caribbean actor over minor spousal abuse, but the widely publicized trial in Manhattan federal court. And 2 of them, several other accusers, also addressed the court Tuesday, calling on the judge to lock Maxwell up and throw away the key. They hailed the sentence that Nathan imposed, with one, Elizabeth Stein, calling it vindication and validation. Virginia Garuff Roberts, which is the individual I was talking about earlier, who had long accused Maxwell and Epstein of trafficking her to Britain's Prince Andrew, described Maxwell like a wolf in sheep's clothing in her letter to the court. Yeah, it's interesting how Prince Andrew, literal royalty, was accused during this trial of sexually abusing a girl who is in the trial under oath. And he's sitting free somewhere right now, probably on a different island, sexually assaulting other young children. Like, what the fuck kind of world is this? It says, she went on to say that, Ghislaine, you deserve to spend the rest of your life in a jail cell, she wrote. You deserve to be trapped in a cage forever, just like you trapped your victims. Kate, a former British model who also used her first name and testified at trial, said Maxwell and Epstein's victims are unified to bring justice to a common enemy. No person should be shielded from the consequences of their actions, Kate said, calling Maxwell a manipulative and cruel person who has shown a lack of remorse for how she ruined the lives of countless women and children. Staring at Maxwell, she said, today I can look at Ghislaine and tell her that I became what I am today in spite of her and her efforts to make me feel powerless and insignificant. The disgraced socialite, who has denied that she abused anyone, has remained locked up in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center for nearly 2 years since her bust and throughout her month-long trial. Federal prosecutors at trial portrayed Maxwell as a sophisticated predator who was inextricably linked to Epstein, including in his pursuit of girls to sexually abuse from 1994 to 2004. It goes on to show a literal picture of Prince Andrew with Virginia Garuff, with Ghislaine Maxwell smirking behind her. Maxwell was Jeffrey Epstein's right hand, said Assistant U.S. Attorney Allison Moe, as she said in her closing statements in December 20th. Maxwell and Epstein were partners, she said. They were partners in crime who sexually exploited young girls together. So, ding dong, the witch is dead. Bitches. Ghislaine Maxwell is in jail for at least 20 years. Well, at the most 20 years, which I think is insignificant. I think she should literally be given a 40-year sentence and on good behavior have the opportunity to be out when she's 125 years old. I think that 20-year sentence for all of the horrific things that she did is unjust. And eventually we'll either see that, maybe she's going to wind up hanging herself in her prison cell with padded walls, with, the video being cut at exactly the right time, while on suicide watch. Or maybe we'll see her get out on good behavior after 7 years, which I think is the more likely of the scenarios.